Thank you for joining us tonight for our parenting panel, Real Conversations with Real Moms About Real Life. And the call will be recorded, so you can feel free to send this to other busy moms that might be interested in the content we have tonight. I first want to welcome you to Revel 11. Revel 11 is a platform for inspiration and connection. It started off with Joni Parsons and Monica Smith, who are on the phone, the two co-creators of Revel 11. And they have done an amazing job this past year during the pandemic, creating a safe online community for important conversations and things that are top of mind for women and especially moms. And so it's such an honor to be here tonight with three moms who I really respect. And my name is Monica Huntsberry. I'm an advisor, I'm an advocate, and I'm gonna let each of the guests tonight introduce themselves. Before I do that, Joni, do you have anything else you wanna add? Joni, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
Thank you for joining us tonight. To all the panelists, we appreciate you taking the time, and for everyone else, thank you for joining us. And I know this is just going to be a very inspiring conversation, so thank you.
Yeah, it's going to be intimate and inspiring. It's a small audience, so I really want you to put your questions in the chat, and nothing is going to be off limits. So welcome. With that, Naomi, can I ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your family unit as well?
Sure. So my name is Naomi Hadaway. I am a native Nebraskan and currently in Omaha, Nebraska. But in the middle of all of that, I lived several places in the United States, as well as 4 years abroad in Asia, including Singapore and New Delhi. I am a licensed real estate agent. I own my own real estate company, and currently I do a lot of work in housing, in the homelessness prevention system. And I'm also running for city council here in Omaha. Elections are in April and May, so that's coming up really quick. And my family unit looks like 3 kiddos. My oldest is 26, a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old. I am married and have been for 18 years, and kind of unique. My husband lives in a different state. So I'm in -7 degrees and he's in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He has moved with his career, and this last time we decided to put roots and our kiddos kind of first and let them stay put. So that's a really fast introduction of me.
You just have a few things going on. And the fact that you made time to share your wisdom and your nuggets with us tonight is really awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Naomi. Meredith.
Hi, I'm Meridith Dillon, also here in Omaha, Nebraska. I work in private philanthropy here, actually do some work with Naomi in the housing sector and in homelessness as well. And my family unit, I'm a single mom. I have 3 wonderful kiddos, my 2 youngest daughters, and what we call our non-binary wonder is my oldest child. So we're here again in -7, and we are weathering the pandemic as well.
And Meredith, again, just applause to you as a single mom raising 3 wonderful children who are all school age and working full time during the pandemic. That takes a lot. And I know your days are long, so thank you again for being here. And just a little fun nugget that I have to share and brag about a little bit is Meredith is my younger sister. That's the connection to Omaha. Lisa. Lisa, are you on mute?
Sorry about that. Thank you so much to Revel 11 for hosting this and for having me. My name's Lisa Lilienthal. I'm a native Atlantan and currently living in Sacramento, California. I'm married to my husband, Gene. We've been married for 22 years. And we have 2 kids, young adults now, 21, my daughter Annie, and 19, my son Cooper. And I do communications consulting, what we call engagement strategy, with a small agency called Dialogue that is based in Atlanta, but that has a couple of us are spread out all over the country. So I
And
should be better at Zoom.
well, and like Meridith and Naomi, Lisa's got just a few things going on at home, and she's also a big activist and is part of a really important initiative. If those of you don't know about it, it's called Drawdown Georgia, which is doing wonderful things to help reverse the negative impacts of climate change, and really a visionary and advocate, and just been a dear friend for many, many years. So thank you for joining, Lisa. It's great to have you guys here. So
Thank you.
I want to take you back for a minute, and let's just flip the clock a year ago to February 2020. Like, no one saw 2020 coming, right? We were just talking about all the things we were still doing in February when we were a little bit, naive to what was about to happen. Lisa, tell me a little bit about what you had planned for the spring. I know you had some big things going on at your home.
That's true. Yeah. So my son, who's 19, graduated in June. And so we were, of course, in the midst of his senior year. He has Down syndrome, and he has been fully included in the public school system, and really beginning before public school, and in preschool, he's always been mainstream, fully included. However,
We lost you, Lisa.
sorry, it was super exciting to think about him graduating with his class, and going through that rite of passage that may not have seemed like such a given when he was born. So we were in the middle of his senior year, and then my daughter Annie, who has some fairly significant mental health struggles, was actually struggling pretty hard this time last year. So I can talk more about that as our conversation goes on. But we were kicking off the focus group research for the Drawdown Georgia project that Monica mentioned. And I was doing a lot of traveling. I always travel a lot for work, and usually once or twice a month. And I was spending quite a bit of time back east in Georgia, in particular working on this climate project that was going to launch later in the year. So it was business as usual. My last flight, I arrived back in Sacramento at the very end of February. I think it was maybe the 28th, maybe even March 1st. And I got a little bit sick on that trip, and they were just starting to talk about COVID. And I said to my client, I'm not getting back on a plane for a little while. And sure enough, haven't since.
For a little while. That's so interesting.
Yes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for sharing about your story and about Cooper. And it must have felt disappointing for his senior year. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Naomi, can you take us back to February 2020 and what you and your family were up to?
Yeah, so, it's so strange. So, as I mentioned at the very beginning, my husband and I live in two different places, and we had just spent Christmas with him, and I was riding a motorized scooter in California, and it broke, and my knee all the way down shattered, and so I was in the middle of kind of social distancing and isolating before the pandemic hit. And so it really impacted our reality as far as my physical therapy and surgery and all of those things. And so it was really interesting to navigate what that meant for our family. My husband wasn't with us, and so my kids had, to kind of take over the slack of all of that. And it was challenging. But at the same time, I felt like we had been preparing. By the time it hit in Nebraska, I think March 13th was kind of the day here in Nebraska anyway. And my accident had been December 28th. And so we had a chunk of time that we had already been just our family unit. We weren't going out, we weren't doing things. And so it was probably less traumatizing to us to try and start realizing what that meant for us to be isolating. The other thing that was interesting to me for my February, March in 2020 was I had just left a very good job in a nonprofit environment. And I was kind of leaping out onto a branch to see about doing some consulting work and being able to do impact in my community my way. And so there was a lot of quiet time and a lot of reflection time that the first quarter of 2020 kind of dumped in my lap. So I look back on it now, and thankfully I can say that I've grown a lot as an individual because of the lessons and that time of reflection.
That's powerful. Thank you. And Meredith, how about you in 2020?
Yeah, I think one of the most memorable things was, having some conversations with you actually in January of 2020, and I had been invited by I participate in a nonprofit yoga studio here in Omaha, and they go on an annual trip to Panama every year. And something I had always wanted to do is go on a yoga retreat and really get away. And I have never taken a vacation on my own. Number one, I had never been to South America, or Central America rather, and I um, had never been able to go on a yoga retreat or decided to be away from my children for more than maybe 2 days at a time, and since they were born. So my oldest is 17, and so one of the things that I took a leap on was the first week of February going to Panama and participating in this yoga retreat. And it was a fairly decent financial investment for me, and I was having some guilt around investing in myself and taking that time and leaving my children. And when I look back on, one of the things that I couldn't have known would be a tremendous investment, and one of the best things I could have ever done in 2020, it was to go on that yoga retreat and really spend some time with myself. And I've had the opportunity to draw on the lessons that time of reflection gave me. And I also am longing for the weather and the beauty of Panama that I keep close to my heart. So I think that was a decision that was I couldn't have known was so good at the time.
That's a really fantastic reflection. And I think I think for most moms, and feel free to put comments in the chat, I think it is really difficult for us to invest in ourselves, to take time away from our family or the people that need us, and to do things for sometimes just basic self-care. And while we know that it's up to us to put on the oxygen mask first, so we're there for our family, it's knowing that, but also executing that in the moment is not easy. So I do want to talk a little bit about this past year, and how the pandemic has impacted your lives as parents and as working parents. And maybe we just first lean into that theme of self-care, how we've been in this an extended time, longer than we probably all anticipated. How have you managed to incorporate self-care and asked for support this past year? Meredith, do you want to continue with that theme?
Sure. It has been a trial of errors, I think, for me, in terms of learning my own needs around self-care. Again, I think coming back from Panama and just being really energized and ready to continue my practice, and to really have found a community of people in particular that I connected with on that trip. And then all of that sort of community coming to a halt. I'm a person who likes to get out and likes to participate in community events and loves to take my family places, and all of those things coming to a halt was really shocking. I also, because I work in philanthropy, and a lot of my portfolio addresses basic needs, we were in a panic immediately. How can we support our community? What needs to be done? Do we wait for government? Which is always an interesting question in here in Nebraska. And I think I probably worked easily 60 hours a week for the first 3 or 4 weeks after we came home, which Naomi mentioned was March 13th, and thought if we worked hard enough and fast enough, we could solve the problem. learned really quickly that that wasn't the case. And I also learned really quickly that, you know, 9 and 10 hour Zoom call days left me completely empty and feeling like I couldn't possibly have another conversation, even with the people who I care and love the most, who are my children. And so realizing that I couldn't continue on that path, and trying to figure out how to set some boundaries at work, and even taking really small breaks after the workday, and you know, being able to uh, spend some time in quiet, you know, learning my yoga practice alone again or online, and exploring kind of some time to carve out for myself, even while I'm at home with my kids. Because I think that, I don't know about all of you, but for me, my time was always time away from, and I felt the need to always be on when I was home. And I had to change that, because and create some boundaries, even within our home with my kids, of like, I need some time to myself. I need this hour to myself, and trying to plan around that with them, and so that I was kind of safeguarding some self-care time. Again, whether that was reading, or whatever that was, and then sometimes being able to just say, okay, tonight we're going to do DoorDash, and I need someone else to cook a meal if it's been a long day. That's a form of self-care to for us, and for me. I think, you know, trying to figure out how to continue to connect with friends, and it comes in waves, really. Again, another lesson that I've learned from Panama, and have been able to share, is when I imagine the days and really hard challenges that have come our way, from both a work perspective and a parenting perspective. I think about, the best way to weather a wave is when you stay flat and in the center of the wave. And when your body remains flat, the wave comes over you instead of knocking you back. And so, as much as there's a part of me that's a warrior that wants to stand up and face the wave, that's how I get knocked over, right? And so, just trying to remain still, and take time to pause and reflect, has been a really big part of my own self-care.
That's a really beautiful reflection and also analogy. Thank you for sharing. Great tips. Lisa, I'd love to hear from you. I know you can relate to lots of Zoom calls and long days as well. How
Yeah.
do you
Yeah.
practice
I was,
balance?
yeah, I was just thinking, like, it's so different to have older children, young adult children, you know, who still have needs, of course, and who are having their own pandemic experience, you know, being separated from their friends and their social life. And for both of my kids, it just hit at a time when um you know, it just like their lives aren't, you know, like Cooper wasn't moving on to his next thing yet because he was graduating and we weren't sure what that next thing was going to be. And sure enough, all the next things, you know, kind of collapsed. And then my daughter was, you know, sort of in the middle of trying to figure everything out for herself. And it's just such a different time in life to be parenting, but you have some of those similar things, like, you know, you're needing to make time for yourself and for your partner, spouse. If you have one, you're needing to meet all the demands of your work. And, you know, you know, like Meredith and like everybody, I'm sure I have work that I'm fortunate that I enjoy, but it's also really hard sometimes to create those boundaries. And, you know, especially if people around you aren't modeling the great boundaries, you know. So not to call anybody out in particular, but just, you know, knowing being true to yourself and knowing yourself well enough to know, like, this is a day I can push it and go all day, and this is a day I need to really just like take a nap. You know, and not beating yourself up for that, and not you know, not feeling guilty for any of the things that you need to do or want to do for yourself. And I think that's hard, but I think once you have older children who are young adult children, and I don't know if anybody on the call agree, it's a little easier to navigate that part of the road. You know, I mean, the harder part is sort of watching them and watching their lives not go in the direction, and not having the social supports that they normally have, that I think was really hard. And but, you know, the thing that I think is really important, I love what Meredith just said, the story about the wave and riding the wave. I just think it's so important for all of us then and now to think about how resilient we are, and especially to think about how resilient young people are, and how much life they have ahead of them. And one thing that has really helped us, I think, at my house is that we frequently talk about how are we going to talk about this 10 years from now, 20 years from now? How are my kids going to remember this time when they're my age? And what are they going to remember about it? And what's going to be the big takeaways? And so just reminding yourself, I think that's been really helpful to us, just to remind ourselves to think about perspective, and to think that it won't always, there's so many days where it feels like it's been like this forever, right? And it's just Groundhog Day over and over again. And thank goodness for DoorDash. I could not agree more. um,
Although,
and
Lisa, you have to tell us your
I do
DoorDash
have a funny
story.
DoorDash story. Yeah.
Yes.
So Cooper, my son, is learning money management, and he has his own banking account. And we had set up he has some income now from Social Security, and most of it goes into savings, but we've left some of it for him to have, some disposable income to buy apps and, order things off Amazon if he wants to, and then occasionally have DoorDash. So he would occasionally get to do his DoorDash, and it was up to him to decide, but he had a budget he was trying to stay within and all that. So one of the first times that he independently ordered from DoorDash and didn't like consult us or whatever, he felt super, super adult about it. I heard the door and I figured out what was going on. I thought, great, great. He did that all by himself. We don't need to be involved in evaluating his decision or what he ordered or what kind of food. And so a few minutes later, I came in, he's setting himself up at the dining room table, and I came in and I said, so Coop, what'd you order? And he said, oh, steak and lobster.
It's such a Cooper story. I just love that.
And I was surely expecting him to say like Chick-fil-A, which is usually his favorite dish. So yeah, it is a very Cooper story. But and that's just another reminder of how important it's been during the pandemic to find those moments of, to keep your sense of humor and find those moments that you can really just laugh about what's happened, and not take it all too seriously.
I love that. I love your ability to laugh and to find humor, even in the tough times. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks.
Naomi, do you have any coping tips or self-care tips that you'd like to share?
So I think, listening to both Meredith and Lisa, I would echo a lot of what they both said. One of the things that's been so crucial for me is I don't take meetings before 10 a.m. And again, kind of to what Lisa said about the privilege of my work, I also have stopped apologizing or explaining myself. So instead of saying, I don't take meetings before 10 a.m. because I want me time, it's just I'm not available at that time. I can meet with you at 10:30. And that's been such a joy to almost just learn and lean into with my own power of being able to set that. At the end of the day, to Meredith's point, I spent my March, April, and May really working on eviction prevention and rental assistance for our community. And it was 10 o'clock at night and I was exhausted. And I thought, like, I can't get up and do the same thing in the morning, going through until 10 o'clock at night. And then I was like, I'm the only one setting my schedule. And so I started just shifting that a little bit. And once I had recovered with my leg enough so that I could get back up to my bedroom, I really started setting up my room so that it was what I wanted to wake up to every morning. We go to hotels and we always marvel at how lovely it feels, right? To wake up or to go into a hotel room. And there's little small things, I have plants all over my room. I bought really cool sheets, and just make sure that my morning is the way I want it to be. I even brought a coffee pot up to my bedroom because that way I don't have to leave to have hot coffee in the morning. So just some small little things that let me create my own self-comfort. The other thing that I have learned this last year, and it's not a bubble bath or champagne, but a form of self-care that I've really leaned into also is really strong boundaries around friendships. I've always been someone that's seen as strong. And so a lot of times I end up with people needing things from me. And so to be able to have that recovery time of realizing what it feels like to lean on other folks was a learning lesson for me. And so coming out of that, then trying to figure out, how do I keep that going? And someone a long time ago told me this example of holding out your hand to accept relationships, but making sure your arms extended so that you have some time between and some space between that relationship and your heart. So you give some time to figure out if it's the right thing for you. And I think about that all the time, whether it's my city council work or my nonprofit work. If we extend some space between our heart and what we're offering our family or our kids or our community, we can be kind and loving and a recipient of relationship, but then also take some time to make sure that it's right for us and what we need. So.
Oh, that's so lovely. You
Isn't that
guys
so
have
good?
That's really beautiful. Yeah, I love that.
you guys have such beautiful wisdom to share, and I love the comments that are coming up in the chat right now too. And I appreciate everybody chiming in, and keep them coming, and also share your own ideas of self-care if you'd like. I know we can all benefit from that. You bring up an interesting point, and one of the questions that I had on here to ask you guys is, how have you learned to say no, both at home and at work? And are there any tips or examples that you would want to share? Anybody? Lisa, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think boundaries, I mean, that's such a word that's so in vogue right now, right? But it's really appropriate. And I think finding ways to set those boundaries, mostly with work, I think for most of us, but sometimes with the kids too, is really important. But I think the thing that for me works, because I admittedly have trouble with boundaries, but one of the things that works for me with boundaries is to associate a ritual with it. So, like, when I turn my work off for the day, hopefully at the end of, whatever, 5 or 6 o'clock or whatever, and I go in the kitchen, I like to turn on some music. I don't always pour a glass of wine because I think everybody realized that got out of hand really quick at the beginning of COVID. Um, but but sometimes I do. And I've little hacks like that, I saw somebody saying that they, at the end of their work day, they light a candle. Just having a ritual that you associate with, like when I get up in the morning, I get my tea, I go and I catch up on the news. I don't always read my work email first, because many of my coworkers and colleagues and clients are on the East Coast. So when I get up at 6:30 in the morning, they have already filled up my inbox. And for years and many months into the pandemic, I had that habit of getting up every morning and going through my email. And so I've really tried to put those kind of boundaries in place, and associate a little ritual, whether it's a cup of tea or some music in the kitchen, to do that. And I think, I mean, saying no, I think having boundaries is a form of saying no. um I found myself saying no to so many things, because we weren't getting together with people, and I still have some friends who are still trying to do get-togethers, and we tried at first, but it felt so, especially with Cooper having some extra vulnerability, it felt difficult, to do that. So we were saying no to everything all the time. So I've tried to actually find ways to say yes, but let's do it this way, to either to socialize, not in person, which we do very, very little of. I want to be clear about that. And only with, people that we kind of have a bubble with, but to finding other ways to socialize. Like when Cooper had his graduation, we had a great Zoom. I think some of you were on my Zoom party for Cooper, and it was just the sweetest thing ever. And we were so naive about Zoom then, I didn't think to record it, and it breaks my heart that I didn't do that. But finding those ways, even if it does involve, electronics and the Zoom platform, finding those ways to say yes in new and safer ways, is one thing I've been trying to do.
That's great. Meredith, what about you?
I was thinking about almost no from a parent perspective. So early on in the pandemic, I have my two oldest are very, very different personalities. And I will say that my 15-year-old, was just getting into high school and trying to find a friend group, and I think COVID was really good because when they came home, I knew she wasn't leaving during lunch. She was here in the house. But I had to say no a lot to many requests from her to see friends constantly. That was really hard to say no to, especially because as parents, I think all of us really have these ideas and expectations around what's normal for children, and making sure that they have a normal experience of high school, or a normal, you know, just all those sorts of cultural uh, norms that we don't even realize we have until they're gone. And so I really struggled with saying no, but it was necessary. And on the opposite spectrum, at times we've called my oldest child the COVID police in our house, because uh, they are very fearful of COVID, and their comfort level was incredibly different than the rest of our families. And even though we weren't getting together, inside or with multiple people, trying to create our small bubbles for socialization became really clear at some juncture, that we couldn't go over a year without seeing a person outside of our home. And so what did that look like, and how could we get together outside with masks at a distance, or what was comfortable and what wasn't? And having to say no to them, actually, as when they were trying to step into a parenting role almost with their younger siblings. And so that was really interesting to negotiate and navigate. And then, for us in our family, my youngest child she's 12, and she has a different dad. And so dad is a parenting relationship where we share custody. And so we were early on still going back and forth in terms of an exchange between households, and they had some really different ideas and belief systems than we do around COVID and science and safety. And so that was a really real challenge in having to try to set boundaries there, and to say, yeah, no, we're not comfortable with that. And there was a period of time, my youngest is the only child in our household that's gone back to school since the pandemic started, and they went back at full capacity every day of the week, starting in August. And I really wasn't comfortable with that. And so I had to say no for a while to an exchange of our normal parenting schedule. And so we had to find creative ways to see each other. And that was really hard. I went for a couple of months without being able to hug her. And that was probably one of the most difficult things to say no to as a parent, and never imagining that something would happen in our world where that would be a boundary. And so that was really challenging. And again, thinking, as Lisa's talking about, of the things that we'll remember and that we won't, and how resilient though our children are. And now that we've been able to kind of move past some of the initial challenges, and she's able to come back and forth, and we've figured out a testing regimen and things like that. We have some more normalcy, but I had to try to remember that she would probably someday understand those decisions that we made. But if someone in our household were to get sick, or something were to happen, that's not something that she could have probably overcome. And so trying to figure out, again, where you set the boundaries when it comes to different person's safety levels, and creating boundaries around that was probably our biggest challenge as a family.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. And you're right, living in a world where we don't feel safe to hug our children, it's hard. It's something we wouldn't have imagined. And I have a 24-year-old son who doesn't live at home, and I went through an extended period of 9 months without giving him a hug, until we went through a quarantine period in order to do that. And then once you're able to do that, you just, like, when you are able to spend time with people you love, you cherish it like never before, especially after you've had a leave of being able to feel safe in space with people you normally surround yourself with. Naomi, I'd like to ask you a question about resources or recommendations. As parents are thinking about, lessons that they've learned or seeking resources, even thinking about, school districts in general, what do you think we're learning from this period, and what resources, or how would you recommend people look for resources if they need them? Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, can you clarify, Monica, do you mean specific to pandemic and COVID response, or isolation, belonging, and parenting in general?
That's such a great question. Let's start with parenting in general. If people are feeling like isolated or they don't know what to do or where to turn for support, what might you suggest? And then I think separately, kind of maybe what some of your observations have been related to where there might be gaps and where we have opportunities to work together to better solve as we've learned from this and go forward.
So this is going to feel like not a direct answer to your question,
That's
Monica.
okay.
I'm an avid, voracious reader, and one of the books that I love the most is by a woman named Nilofer Merchant, and it's called The Power of Onlyness. And in The Power of Onlyness, she talks about figuring out what space it is that only you can stand in the world because of your unique lived experience and your diversity. And I think that's one thing that I always want to just encourage parents or caregivers is that, I mean, it's so exhausting, right, to be a parent or a caregiver. And sometimes you just kind of feel like you lose yourself in the middle of it. And to Lisa's point about coming on the other side of parenting, where your kids are young adults, you start to figure out kind of who you are again. I don't know about anyone else on this call, but I am 4 years postmenopausal. And so I think that had something to do with being able to like figure out who I was again. But in the Power of Onlyness, she talks about signaling. And it's the concept of then once you know who you are and once you know that spot that you can stand in, figuring out ways to kind of message that out to other people. And I think that that's been really cool to watch happen in these digital spaces of, picking up on a Zoom call someone else that might have fun earrings and then reaching out to them in the chat and being like, hey, I love your earrings. That forms a bond that is uniquely curious to this time, right? Because we're not able to be together and we're not able to hug. On Zoom chats, you can see the chats going, picking out one little thing and being able to say, I identify with that. And then you signal to that person. It might be because you went on a yoga retreat, or you might have a child that is disabled, or whatever it might be. And it can even be small things. So one of the things that I have noticed, I have a daughter that also goes to the same school district of Meridith. And so she has been in school this whole time. And being able to keep my antenna up for other parents that are struggling with the fact that these kids have all been sent back to school as though there's nothing going on, has been a way to find our little group. We don't talk about it publicly. We don't make a big deal out of it, but we check in with each other on a Thursday randomly to say, like, how's your kiddo doing? Knowing that they are potentially, exposing themselves to COVID every day, or how is your kid doing once they've been directly exposed and they have to be on mandatory 10-day quarantine and the teachers aren't doing school correctly for them. So I think it's a digital intentional version of the pod that everyone's been talking about with COVID, or your pandemic pod. I just think we all know more than we remember about how to connect with each other. And so, maybe it's something that everyone on the call can just take stock of over the next couple of days. What is it that's your unique spot that only you sit in, and then start to just be aware of the spaces that you're in with other people, and signal out and see what happens. So see, Monica, how that wasn't really a
No,
good
I know that was a great
direct, but
response. I love that response. And have you had observations about what you think that we can do going forward to better either support our children's education or the school districts or each other? Any lessons that you plan to carry beyond the pandemic?
well, for me, we've always, so I was homeschooled my entire education, and so I kind of come into schooling with my children as an experiment. I'm learning right along with them what it means to be in a traditional school system, and my mom always taught me to speak up if something didn't feel right. And so I am navigating that with my kiddos and teaching them how to be their own advocates around when something doesn't seem right. And so my daughter has been one of the few students in her high school that on her own self quarantines when a friend of hers gets sick, or when she sees her friends on social media, not her friends, I should clarify, her peers on social media out having big parties. If she knows that she's in classes with them, she self quarantines, and that has been really challenging. But she's, it's her small way of starting to be a leader. And then what I have been doing is feeding that back to the administration and saying, we know that this isn't popular, and we know that you don't see things the same way, but this is why we're doing it. And then I think it's important to detach ourselves from the outcome when you take a stand like that. So we've really been not doing it right all the time, but practicing giving that feedback to the school and to the administration, and then just saying, do with it what you will. We're here if you have questions.
I love that. I love detaching from the outcome. I'm going to ask Lisa one more question, and then Meredith one
Sure.
more question. And then if anyone in the audience has a question, feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll make sure to allow time to answer those. So, Lisa, along those same lines, I know you have advocated for many different things over the course of the time I've known you. Are there ways that you recommend for people to advocate for what they want or need, or resources that you recommend, or just in general thoughts or observations on that topic of being an advocate?
Yeah, well, just building really on what Naomi was just saying, that finding your peers who know are like-minded, and who you can get support and ideas and strength from, I think is really, really important. And sometimes those people are going to be in your community, and sometimes they're not, so really taking the time to do that. I have I mean, I just can't tell you how important the primarily female friendships are in my life. Have a couple of good male friends too, but primarily female friendships in terms of that, and especially finding those friendships that I also loved, Naomi, what you said about like holding out your hand and keeping but keeping a little distance to your heart. And um I mean, one way you can know that a person is that right heart fit for you, I think, is that it's the kind of person who you can go some time without connecting with, and then reconnect with, and still be very, still be in that same place, and not have to feel, some awkward distance, because that time. So finding your people, I think, is really important. And it's so isolating right now. I said earlier about my daughter having some mental health struggles. She hit a really bad place in May, and ended up in the hospital for a few days. And she, for the first time, and her story is hers, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but I want to be sensitive to that. But for the first time, she was able to accept some kinds of help that she wasn't previously. And it's made a huge difference. And right now she's doing great. So everybody say a little prayer, cross your fingers. She's doing really well. And but one of the things that's happened to her because of her mental health struggles is that she's had a really hard time building relationships. So I have tons of female friends and all these really great relationships that I lean into, and I watch her struggle with it. So I tell you all that just to say that, first of all, if your kids are really struggling, we're there, we've been there. Hopefully we'll get through it. Just and then give lots of grace. I just think we should all be in the business of handing out grace cards all day, every day right now. So as much as we need to advocate, I also think we need to recognize that the people who we might be having to confront in our advocacy are going through a very difficult and very challenging time themselves, and may not be showing up as their best selves, or showing up with their best decisions or behaviors or whatever. So just reminding myself all the time, just give some grace to that person, and figure out, take a little extra time to figure out where they are and where they're coming from, so that you can understand if the thing or the person that you're advocating for you know, where they are on all that, and how they're coming at the decisions that they're making, or the you know, or the situation that they've created. And so, and that's not to say that you don't need to advocate, because you absolutely do. It's just to say that right now, um, I don't know, just spreading grace everywhere is probably just a great approach. And I'll stop there, because I know, you know,
No,
I can
I
talk.
appreciate that. And you know, I think one of the things that I often share as well is give the grace cards and start with
Mhm.
yourself, right? Give yourself that grace
Oh,
card first, right?
absolutely.
And just know
Absolutely.
that
I'm
we're
with
not
Naomi
perfect.
though. I'm with Naomi. I think I'm mostly on the other side of menopause. So like I don't have any problems giving myself grace these days.
I love it.
You know,
Perfectionism
first
out
in
the window,
line.
right?
I'm the first in line to give myself grace.
I love that. I do think there is something about, you know, this whole perfectionism in parenting that is a hard habit to break. But at some point in time, when you have enough under your belt, you realize that it's just it is what it is. It's what it is, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if having I also have a disability. For those of you who don't know me, I use a wheelchair, and I have since I was 8 years old. So we have lots of you know, my poor husband, he's like the normal person in our house. But he, normal is such a triggering word right now. Um so you know, I just think that, like, I think in some ways, like, having a big challenge in your life makes a lot of other things really clear, that you know, that you have the benefit of um I don't know, I just think there's some knowing of yourself, some self-awareness that comes along with it. And once you're old enough, you know, hopefully you know, getting comfortable in your own skin and not expecting perfection of yourself, because either your body or your brain or something has already shown you that life is not perfect. And so not expecting perfection, I think there's a real beauty and blessing in that.
That's really lovely. Well said. Thank you so much for sharing, Lisa. You're such a gift. Meredith, you know, one of the things that we were talking about earlier was also, you know, when you have children who are, you know, 16, 17, and they're starting to figure out the world and they're wondering why the world isn't better. And then you have the pandemic and they're feeling uncertain and scared about that. And then also Black Lives Matter, right? And things that just started, it felt like surfacing one after another. And so you're trying to help them through these, you know, social issues and these questions. Can you give us, you know, just a snapshot of maybe how some of that unfolded for you and your children, and any wisdom related to how you continue to support those conversations and help them grow?
Sure. Yeah, I don't know if I have a lot of wisdom. I can definitely, I guess, empathize with parents who, you know, I would say um, it's been an odd time for kids to watch adults, and our behavior and our response to the pandemic, and also really to really polarizing culture, where we've seen a lot this year of name calling and being really quick, instead to give that grace card, to really point fingers at one another. And for our community here in Omaha, um, you know, we're like many communities, because of you know, intentional disinvestment and institutional racism. We have a segregated community that's based on a map that some bankers drew up in the 1930s, right? That was formerly redlined, um, and my two oldest children are you know, multiracial, and have, I think, not experience, they've just been so confused to watch the experience of, again, the responses of adults. And our city didn't handle uh the Black Lives Matter protests in a way that I think was something that uh not in the best way that we could have. And I don't know, for most of you that aren't here from Omaha, we also saw a young man by the name of James Scurlock killed during the Black Lives Matter protests here in Omaha. And it was just really confusing to kids to watch, again, the way adults behaved on social media, the response of the city to, attacking peaceful protesters with tear gas and batons and snipers on roofs. And then an initial release of someone who shot and killed a black man in our community who was protesting. And so it was a really difficult time to be a parent with kids who are aware and awake and who care. And I'll never forget the day that my oldest child came down the stairs with literally a gas mask on and my phone number written down their arm with a Sharpie, and was going out to protest. And I couldn't, like, it wasn't my job to stop them. And I, as an ally, needed to stand aside and allow them to go to a protest where I knew there's snipers on the roof of a building. And that was a really tough day as a parent, but also as an ally, and trying to respect the passion and the belief of a child who felt like they needed to be a part of something that was important to them, and to help them find a platform and a voice that was safe in the midst of that time in our community was really, really difficult. And instead, again, this strange platform of social media that we have that can be a double-edged sword, and trying to encourage them to use that platform as opposed to potentially endangering themselves. That was a tough time. And then I think through the elections and all the things that we saw uh, early on this year, it's very confusing for children. And I think I've remembered a couple of times where I've heard my kids having conversations like, why should we trust adults? Look at the way adults are behaving. And I think for me, it was just a really good reminder that the most powerful way we parent is by example, and so trying to engage with others in conversations in ways that are respectful and that hold space for voices that aren't our own, and having conversations with our kids about the way that they're engaging in those sorts of conversations on social media and with their peers, and really trying to earn back that trust, I think, is a really weird thing as an adult, but really, really important to try to point out also the positive things that adults are doing, and to try to share stories. For me, like, it's great to be able to share the stories about Naomi and the way that I see her boldness in running for city council in a city where you know some might think her ideas of that this is a community for all is radical, and so that's really an inspiring story to be able to share with my kids, and trying to find like little windows of light like that, to say, there's some challenges here, and we aren't at our best yet, but we can't give up hope because we're still working, and that there are people that are doing good, and there are people who are trying to kind of change what leadership looks like in our community and in our country. So I think that has definitely been an additional challenge in the midst of kind of all that's gone on during the pandemic, and really an important time for all of us to kind of pause and really look at the way that we had been living and engaging, and that this is a time where we get to maybe to pivot as we go back into the world someday, and how can we do things differently. And I know that our family has taken some time to pause and think through that, and I know that it's, for me personally, been a time to pause and really reconsider some of the things that we've normalized, and some of the ways that we've engaged. So
Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
It is hard to believe our time is almost over. We are almost right up at the hour here. But I want to ask, somebody asked a great question in the chat about screen time. And I know most of you, I know our panelists have children who are mostly older, and we're not representing necessarily the really young children tonight on tonight's call, but we've all parented really young children and struggled with screen time. So does anybody, Lisa, Naomi, Meredith, have any great thoughts or suggestions related to how to manage all this screen time, especially with online schools, et cetera? Naomi, did you have something?
Well, I just put some thoughts in the chat. I think it's just about redefining, again, to what Meredith said about redefining our normal. Screen time is a part of our
Yeah.
normal now. So how do we redefine that to kind of grab some control back? So we default to music first as often as we can, and I have to tell myself that all the time. One thing that's kind of fun if you're on Spotify is you can do duets if you have a family account, so that, like, for example, my daughter's music and then my music, they mash it together. And so I get to learn new
Oh,
music based on what she's put in her playlist. It's really cool. And that kind of builds some fun opportunities. And then in the world of online grocery shopping, we do that together. Everyone has to help unload. And then by virtue of that, just small little chore practice makes us get away from our screens a little bit, cooking together, watching cooking shows. I think we're not banning the screen, we're just redefining how we use it a little bit.
That's great. I love seeing someone adopted a pandemic dog. I know Meredith did too, and they've been having to do lots of dog walks. I love the puzzles. I know dance parties. I mean, all kinds of things. And if you guys have time to just put a few comments in the chat about this is a great question, Joni. If we can go just a few minutes over,
Yeah,
what is
absolutely.
everyone planning? I love this, Jackie. Everyone, feel free to add to this. What is everyone planning for their first post-pandemic excursion? While you guys are putting that in the chat, let me just bring this to a wrap. I know we talked about some heavy topics, right? But I think we also incorporated some humor. I just love that DoorDash story, Lisa. And I know we also, shared some tips. And I think the important thing to know is we're all just everyday moms, working moms, friends, doing the best we can. And that really everything we have is inside of us, and there is no right or wrong, right? And I think one of the things I've really worked on during the pandemic is to not apologize to my children, because I'm doing the best they can, and you know what? They're pretty lucky to have me. And
Good for you, Monica.
so we let's just roll up our sleeves and do this together. Again, Revel 11 is such a beautiful community for us to be able to share so vulnerably and authentically. I loved how all of you shared tonight. A lot of great wisdom. This call is going to be recorded, or it was recorded, so you can share it. And I'm going to turn it over to Joni for a quick wrap and highlight what we have coming up. I hope to see you guys again. We have so many great topics ahead of us. Thank you so much, Naomi and Meredith and Lisa. You guys are the best. Thank you.
I was going to say the exact same thing, Monica, that just thank you for your vulnerability, your honesty, and just the depth at which you went tonight. That was so meaningful to all of us. So, and I learned so much about parenting, and I know others did too. And thank you for your tips. There were so many good takeaways.